I'm incredibly excited to have the CEOs of Okta, Slack, and Zoom here today to share a little about what we've been going through in terms of remote work, helping customers solve all of their challenges during this crazy environment, and hopefully a little bit of a view into what the future of work is going to look like. So Eric, Stuart, and Todd, really appreciate you guys joining us at BoxWorks today, and want to just jump right in. Maybe if we could just really quickly just do a quick level set of what this whole sort of thrust into remote work has looked like for maybe you personally and the organization, just super quickly, and we'll get everybody caught up to speed on what the state of the world is. So Eric, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, so first of all, Aaron, thank you so much for your invitation. And first of all, I do enjoy working from home. At the same time, I hate working from home.
Okay, well, we were just talking before this got started that you've been running into some internet problems in your work from home setup, which is I think going to make us all feel a bit more normal. What are you dealing with at the moment?
For me, actually, number one thing is make sure always negotiate with my kids for the important meeting like this. Make sure I have enough Wi-Fi bandwidth. So, and that's the number one. So, other than that, I pretty much enjoy it. So,
well, thank you for being able to make that deal happen today. So appreciate it. And Stuart, what's this been like for Slack, the organization, and you?
Well, so I think a little bit like Eric, and maybe broaden that out where. There's definitely aspects that people really like. Those people who had long commutes are loving the fact that they don't have to spend 3 hours on the freeway and that stuff. But I mean, there's real challenges for a lot of people, especially like single parents, I think are the hardest hit, but parents of young kids just in general have it really hard. People who don't like where they live, their apartment's too small, or this environment has made them want to get back closer to family or closer to nature. And then there's other people who are, the commute, the kind of the flexibility, all that stuff is a real advantage. So it's a total mixed bag in how it impacts people, which I think makes it really challenging as a leader. I'm sure all three of you recognize that, but also everyone in the audience.
Yeah. And Todd?
It's for Okta, it's been interesting. We were thinking about moving to more of a flexible, dynamic work style where employees could work remotely or come to the office a few days a week or come to the office full time, and it kind of didn't get a lot of traction internally in the company. And I think that's because we had this inertia, this office-centric inertia. I think one of the biggest things is that inertia has been blown away, and now we're all so convinced that remote is effective and can have all these benefits that I think long term you'll see this accelerate to more of a dynamic environment really happen.
And I think you guys just recently made an announcement around even moving further from either remote first or a sort of biasing toward remote. What's the status at Okta from a culture and work style standpoint?
I think we're moving. Like before COVID, we had like all companies, we had some remote people, but we were largely office based. And I think the future for us is really about employee choice. Wherever they want to live, but also supporting them with an office if they want to come to the office every day, because many people do, but also everything in between. So if you want to come to the office a few days a week and it's really about employee choice and flexibility and trying to make that as effective as possible.
Yeah. So, and we'll get into kind of how this whole hybrid environment sort of ends up playing out. But before we do, so kind of at the beginning middle of March, we all get thrust into this remote work environment. I think because we're cloud first technologies and both internally and the products that we deliver, it was probably a little bit more straightforward for us to be able to adapt to this environment. And I think our job has been now to help customers go out and have that same experience, which is where largely our focus has been for the past 6 months or so. When you look at how this cloud first, digital first, remote first for now environment is playing out, what are you seeing in terms of how it's actually either subtly or materially changing how we work? So Stuart, maybe you've probably been thinking about this as long as anybody in this space around what a digital first organization ends up looking like. But are you seeing changes to how work gets done, the patterns of work, the agility of work? What are you seeing both maybe within Slack, but also within the customer base?
I think the two different phases, I guess, that maybe the first phase, the first like 60 or 90 days, and in some cases maybe a little bit longer, was just like, how are we going to continue what we were doing before? So it's more or less direct replacements for things. Benedict Evans, who some of us know as an investor, had this really neat essay, kind of obscure, but it's called Office Messaging and Verbs. And so if you search it, there's a bunch of really interesting stuff in there, but he talks about the first application of digital technology is usually a direct replacement for what we did before. So we had typewriters and we had carbon copy forms for expense reports. And the very first version was like, make a Word doc that looks exactly like the form. And then the next version is make a Windows app that looks exactly like the form. And then the third version is make a web app that looks exactly like the form. And then at some point people are like, let's just take a picture of the receipt. And you find a way to apply the technology and skip to a new method. So I think you're seeing a lot of that in like micro doses. It's like, we used to have the daily X meeting or the weekly Tuesday something something, and so we just do that same thing. And people who spend a lot of time whiteboarding with each other will find a direct replacement for whiteboarding and so on. But I think you're starting to see now, partly because sometimes that's a real pain in the butt, people spending more energy and creativity and trying to find brand new ways to accomplish the same goals. So it's not to do the same thing better or faster or simpler. Of course, that's always welcome, but just to replace it altogether. And one big area of focus for us internally, and what we're starting to see with customers as well, is we're all used to being at this point on video calls all day. What of our activities, which we currently only do in a synchronous way, like a meeting where we're all live at the same time, can we instead do asynchronously? And if we can like hive off some percentage of that, I think it'll reduce the demands for us to constantly be on calls with one another, create a little bit more flexibility. And I think in some cases, the artifact, whether it's a document or it's like a recorded video or something else, is a better way to accomplish the same goal because it's much more portable. Like people who didn't have to be in the meeting to watch it, they can get the benefit of that artifact the next day or the next week or the next month.
One that reminds me of something that I did. It was kind of unintentional. So we were having these great Zoom meetings, but we would have slides on the screen, and when you put the slides up, all the people's faces would get small, so you couldn't see the expressions and so forth. So I just banned slides. I said, no more slides in Zoom. And it had the unintended consequence. Well, first of all, we got to see people's faces, which was better, and get the emotion in the meeting. But the unintended consequence was people started doing exactly what you're saying, Stuart. They started being more asynchronous with the prep docs and the assets before the meeting. And it was kind of a boon for exactly what you're saying, that the more asynchronicity you can have and the more permanent those artifacts are. And plus you get to see people's faces in the meetings.
Todd, our business model is dependent on you continuing to produce slides in the future. So if you can just make sure, they're produced somewhere and just shared asynchronously, that's
well, yeah,
he's still making the docs.
Okay, so you're still creating the data somewhere.
So Eric, just quickly, I think at one point Stuart mentioned, I just want to also quickly add on to what he said. The real-time collaboration, like video, like SMS or email, will put a pressure on other side. That's why you need to have a more like async collaboration. Like you just otherwise always real time. You will have like a meeting fatigue or something like that.
And so we're going to now put Eric on the spot because he caused this whole problem. So when you look at meetings and the future of how we are coming together, what are you seeing in terms of interesting trends around how work is changing? For instance, at Box, I think like everybody else, one of the, I think, powerful dynamics is all of a sudden you can bring together people from, across time zones, across locations, across departments in a way that wasn't possible in the physical setting. Are you seeing anything about that type of culture and how we work together begin to evolve? What do you imagine we're doing in a year from now from this standpoint? What does that look like?
Yeah, so first of all, prior to this pandemic crisis, I guess nobody would like to do a test to send all of their employees back to home, right? I think it's totally, I would say, unimaginable, right? However, because of this pandemic crisis, we all went through this stress test. Guess what? It works. There's no productivity loss. That's why everybody think about, hey, after the pandemic crisis is over, maybe you should keep that. Send all employees back to home twice a week, 3 times a week. That should work. So meaning from a productivity perspective, it's okay. However, it does bring in some side effect, like a mental health, like a creativity, like as you mentioned, there's no whiteboard, right? And this is really hard. So when all back to the office, it's very likely it's hybrid. How to mix working from home, working from office, how to make sure mix productivity with creativity, how to engage with employees. And on the one hand, working from home, engagement with employees is getting much better. I met with more employees, with their family members as well. But back to office, how can you keep that? Right? That's something like the hybrid. So I think good news, we have time. But overall, the trend is about a hybrid. Everything is about a hybrid.
Yep. And as Stuart, so if you kind of remove the, let's say the pandemic and economic sort of stresses that have been caused by this environment for 1 second, to the extent that can sort of be isolated. When you look at productivity and how that is shifting and changing in this environment because of digital technologies, whether it's remote or we're back in the office working in the same new way, what do you see as the big accelerants to work that a mixture of these technologies is enabling?
For a lot of people in IT broadly, there's new challenges that make it hard to really advance in some of the other stuff. But when people are advancing on improvements to productivity, it seems to be largely driven by decoupling processes and more software, more and more different product categories kind of creeping in to allow automation in areas where there wasn't that possibility before. And I think the thing to have in mind is like some utility curve or some kind of convenience curve where it's very inconvenient to do something, and so I don't do it, and then it gets more convenient and suddenly I do it all the time. And if you summed up like all of the taxi rides and all of the ride sharing rides, made that total rides taken, 2005 to 2020, it wasn't just like a linear increase. It's like suddenly it's way more convenient. So where I would have got a ride from a friend, or I wouldn't have taken that trip, or I would have taken the bus or something like that, now we'll take rides. What's the equivalent of that in software? And I think there's a minimum cost for systems integration in the broadest possible sense. And let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 5. And that just kind of a necessary consequence of that is anything that would only be a 4 in value, or even a 5, or 3 or 2 or 1, we just don't do. So the recruiter gets the message from DocuSign back that says the candidate accepted the offer letter. And then the recruiter is like, okay, manually, I will go to the applicant tracking system and do this update. Manually, I will go to the HRIS and do this update. Manually, I will go and tell everyone on the team that the candidate signed it. That's not worth calling Accenture and waiting.
Although somebody has lit up that project before, but yes.
None of those are individually that important, but in aggregate, it's as big as any other big systems investment or big systems integration investment you can make. So, I think this is kind of more like green shoots than something we're seeing all over the place, but the combination of new tools specifically designed for like a much narrower use case, but that go farther into it, and things, all of our products here, but just, the broader software community, the commitment to interoperability and the kind of decoupling of things that in the old days would have been like these big rigid systems that, you could only change every couple of decades. Now you end up with 1,000 systems, which is a pain in its own way, but you can swap any of them out, like they're decoupled, and you can make these incremental improvements. And with that, the cost of this integration comes down, the convenience changes, and we'll end up doing a lot more systems integration. I mean, someone joked, Box has a workflow product called Relay. Yeah, okay. So first of all, I said sick name, and I meant it, and this is on Twitter, and I thought, oh, that's a really good name. And then someone pointed out that like every enterprise software company has something that's named Relay. Sure enough, 60 days later, internally, they're like, hey, we're working on this new project called Relay. And I was like, what?
Todd, you actually made an acquisition in the past year specifically on how do you drive that integration between software. What are you guys doing from an automation standpoint?
Yeah, I think we think about it similarly to everyone here on the call. We want to make Okta programmable. So we think that in this landscape that Stuart describes and every CIO or IT person or company is figuring out, there are thousands and thousands of systems and potential systems they have. So the next question is like, what are the 4, 5, 6, 7 core first class clouds? You know, there's probably going to be one around collaboration. There's going to be one around video. There's going to be one around content. We think there's one around identity. So once you pick those, whatever, 5, 6 kind of core clouds, then to connect those to all the thousands of other things, they all have to be programmable. So it's not like you're going to have one abstract concept of programmability that's going to do it all for you. You have to, your core systems have to be programmable. And that's how we think about it, which is why we did this acquisition a couple years ago. And it's resulted in this product called Okta Relays. No, I'm just kidding.
We're gonna have to sue so many companies based on this call that we're having right now.
We can get our lawyers on the next call and we can chat about it. No, it's called it's a very fancy name. It's called Okta Workflows.
Oh wow, it's actually funny. In kind of back to Stuart's point, I think there's been this. You know, when we talk about workflow and Box Relay to customers, a lot of times they say, well, how does this fit within, you know, the other workflow systems I have? And I think it's this interesting moment where people are realizing, wait a second, all software is really workflow. And there's just a spectrum of, is it completely ad hoc, unstructured workflow, or is it semi-structured, or is it, you know, everything structured? And so by definition, you know, all software should have workflow, you know, built into it. And then we should have ways of plugging in those workflows together. And so whether that's through a Slack, you know, interface where you're being able to, you know, kick off these, you know, the different tasks between systems, or completely from an identity model from Okta, or maybe, you know, Zoom workflow is launching soon. We'll find out what the Zoom relay strategy is maybe in a second. But I think the ability to bring the workflows between our software together in a seamless way is probably a little bit of the next frontier for enterprise software. So you know, Eric, don't want to leave you out of the workflow conversation. This very exciting workflow chat. Do you guys have anything that you're thinking about on this front?
We do actually. You know, as you mentioned, API is very important. Unfortunately, we do not have a code name called the Zoom Relay yet, but actually integration is very, very important for all of us. You know, from a workflow perspective, making it very seamless.
Yeah, Aaron, when you were describing it, one thing that popped into my mind was awesome. It's kind of like if you do go back 10 years ago, it was kind of novel for these systems to have APIs, right? It seems weird, but back in the day, you had access to the database directly and the file system directly, and API was kind of a novel thing. So then with cloud and SaaS, people innovated, and now everyone has an API. And I think 10 years from now, this concept of programmability, or as you mentioned, semi-structured, unstructured workflow will just be table stakes. Everyone will have it. It'll be what you do together that'll be interesting.
So why don't we now shift to the pure technology side? So we're seeing this new way of working. I'm going to posit that it's more agile, more nimble. It's, you know, organizations get a bit flatter. You can communicate across boundaries. We believe that having best-in-class technology that is purpose-built for solving really big problems, but in a simple, elegant way, is obviously where I think we've all founded our organizations and you know, try to design our technology. Eric, when you look at that point about how do we bring the experiences together, whether it's through APIs, through integration, where do you see that going? I think we have a lot of customers, you know, over you know 20,000 folks at BoxWorks that are thinking about, you know, how do I make all this technology work together seamlessly? How do I make sure that I can have a best of breed technology environment? What are you seeing now and on the horizon to improve that?
I think first of all, when you send employees back to home to work, there's a number of important things. Make sure there's no productivity loss, right? That's why the productivity tools is number one important. Not like working in the office, right? If something does not work, you always can call IT team. Right? However, now everyone is working from home. It's really hard to reach out to IT team. That's why best breed service will do well, will thrive. That's number one. Number two is you need to make sure the tools you give to employees, and make sure, you know, employees, they know how to use that. Ease of use is critical. Otherwise, like take Okta for example, so easy to use. I mean, never needed to call our IT team. Otherwise, you need to know how to log in with multiple systems. It's really not scalable, right? That's the second thing. The third thing is when you give employer tools, so make sure all of those tools are sustainable, meaning not only do they use at home, also can use in the office, and there's no IT support. So meaning you cannot have all those very complex on-prem tools, right? You need to log in with VPN, that don't work, right? That's a consistent experience. That's also very important. Last but not least, we just talk about that. Make sure all those tools can very well integrate together, more like a one stack rather than multiple stacks. That's also important.
And Todd, you guys have some great kind of proprietary data on the growth of apps and how people are using these applications. What are the trends you've seen in the past maybe couple of years? Obviously, even more pronounced during the COVID environment. Where is the future of the app ecosystem going?
Yeah, I think that the most obvious one is you kind of intimated about, which is more apps, right? More apps for all users, more niche apps for different functional areas, more apps for big companies, small companies. Probably a couple interesting things that might not be first apparent right away is that even when you get suites coming in, whether it's like Office 365 or other suites, you still get a lot of apps used within that suite. So we see in our data that people that use Office 365 also use G Suite, right? People that obviously use Office 365 use Okta and use Slack. And so I think that's kind of a myth that even if you have one of these suites, you're actually, exclusively using that. Other interesting parts of the data are, and this is more COVID-19 specific, but you saw early in COVID-19, you saw a big spike in the obvious things like, Zoom and the collaboration technologies. But you also saw a commensurate spike in a new enabling ecosystem of security. So like the replacements for whatever the next replacement is for VPN type security, endpoint security, you saw a spike in that. So people are reacting.
If you think about, okay, we kind of know where work's going. We think we know that architectures, it's going to be cloud first. It's going to be interoperable. You need systems that connect, together and create seamless experiences. Ultimately, the final outcome of all of this is the oft used term of digital transformation and ultimately changing the business models, changing the ways that businesses serve their customers. Where do you think we are in that impact of so not just how we work, but then how that work ends up shaping how we work with our customers, how we go and serve our ecosystems. I don't know. Who the most sporty is among us, but Todd's the strongest. But what inning are we in, Todd, of that digital transformation sort of journey when you look out at the market?
Yeah, I just think of like a empty baseball stadium with the fake cutouts of the people.
Okay, so maybe not a great timed analogy.
I think. Obviously, so the impact of technology and the internet and is on the economy and on every company is massive and still relatively early. One thing that I think is interesting about COVID-19 is when I talk to customers and what I see out there is it's really in a very concrete way helped companies see that this is really doable, like from a customer engagement perspective. And more importantly, probably from like a supply chain and from a distribution chain, they can get closer to the customer, and they've seen it because they've had to in many cases. They've seen that it's possible. So it's like, I think we've seen, I don't know, to use a sports analogy, but it might work. Like we've seen now people have run a mile under 4 minutes, right? And I think what you're going to see is the next 10 years is like, you're going to see a lot of people say that was possible. So now we can do it. We can get closer to the customer. We can, disintermediate and not be disintermediated. And we can really use all these technologies in ways that maybe a couple of years ago, we kind of knew or had a theoretical idea was possible, but now we know it's possible. We saw someone do it or we did it ourselves.
Congratulations on bringing it to a personal fitness analogy from professional sports. So that was well executed. Eric, where do you think we are in this journey? Where, what are the industries that maybe are left to be transformed?
I think first of all, you look at the travel industry. I think very less. You will have less business travels. Right? Prior to this pandemic crisis, look at our sales team. And most of our SMB sales rep, they never needed to visit a customer. Right? I still can close a deal. But during this pandemic crisis, guess what? We also can close a deal. You also close a lot of deals, right? I mean, the enterprise deals. You never needed to visit a customer anymore. I think you look at the sales team as a whole. I think very likely, and for any, no matter how complex that deal is, no matter how big that deal is, I think you can get it done very well without the need, to fly to somewhere. I think that's going to change almost every industry, every customer, every business.
And just because you're on the front lines of this, I mean, where do you think we are in kind of healthcare being transformed because of telemedicine and banking from a virtual client experience standpoint?
I know actually, like to healthcare, for example, this is one of our fastest growing, market. I think it's true for your business as well, because today actually I have the team member, right? And he suffered from the pain for several weeks. He's called a doctor. Guess what? For the first 2 appointments, always online, right? This is the telemedicine, telehealth. It's real. It works, and it does save the time. Make sure actually the doctor can serve more patients, and the patient feel like they can get taken care of, timely manner. As telemedicine, telehealth, I think that's going to completely change the entire landscape of healthcare industry.
Plus, you don't have to have the old magazines in the waiting room. You get your own magazines that are new.
You just have Twitter. So it's, you just get to be on Twitter while you wait for your video doctor to show up. What, Stuart, maybe if you could bring us home on this sort of digital transformation theme, when you look out at customers that are thinking about the next wave of being able to grow their businesses, make sure to have a much more digital centric experience going forward. Where do you think we are? Where do you think that goes next? What would you maybe, if you were talking to a CDO or a CTO on that front, what would you be sharing?
The transformation that hasn't happened yet is the stuff that we talked about at the beginning of the call, which is the recruiter gets an email from DocuSign that says candidate signed the offer letter, and then she has to do a bunch of stuff manually. How many of those things are there? Like millions and millions and millions. And that's to me, that's kind of the frontier of digital transformation.
Yeah, I was on a call just yesterday with a global CPG company, and they estimated that something on the order of 50% of their transactions are still ultimately either manifested in or requiring analog connection points between phone calls, paper, and so all of that has to get digitized, and that ultimately then will let them get products to market faster, better serve their customers, understand the trends going on in each sort of subsegment of the market. And so I think we're all trying to get closer to this world of, if you can serve your customers directly digitally, the signal you get from that, the speed that you can transact, the speed that you can get products to market faster is I think ultimately the dream or the utopian state of what digital transformation should be driving. And it's sort of the, what Netflix did to media, what Uber did to transportation. I think we're seeing across all customers in our customer base are trying to get to within their industry and their customer experience. So with that, I think we're out of time, but I want to say thank you for coming on today. Appreciate the great partnerships that we have with all of your companies, and what we see day in and day out from our customer base is just, again, a complete push toward how do we make all these technologies work together to power this new way of working. So maybe we should all try out Eric's new AI feature on this thing. And I don't know if you guys have given this thing a shot, but I'll wish everybody Eric the Bandit. Okay. So with that, we'll give Todd and Stuart a second to figure out how to do AI. Okay, good. Todd, what do you got coming?
I think I need to upgrade. Here's some AI for you, Aaron.
Oh, wow. All right, good. Okay. All right. Well, we appreciate the health PSA. So, all right. See you guys.
Bye, Aaron. Thanks.